Hi, everybody, and welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know the penultimate episode of Silo Season 2. My name is Mike Bloom. Everybody, stop playing the Monster Mash. It's not October just yet, and it's not the finale just yet, but we have one wallop of an episode. Paul Billings said that he has a lot of questions, and this episode brought, in my opinion, a good amount of answers that listen, Grace Leeder, let me start out by just coming in hot here. I think that The Safeguard may not just be far and away the best episode of Silo Season 2, but I dare say one of the best episodes of Silo, period, so far.
I agree.
Yes.
I think that is absolutely true. It was a tremendous episode of television. I think we could discuss it. Is ice cream better than music? Is music better than ice cream?
I mean, I'm
We'll
I'm
chat.
team music over ice cream. I think that ice cream incredibly enjoyable in the moment, but it is much more of a short-term thing just due to the way that we metabolize things versus like a tune will stick in your head for a lot longer than maybe the ice cream will stick onto your belly fat.
Listen, I don't think it's that hot of a take to say the collective history of
Yeah.
music is better than the collective all, like the limited probably amount of ice cream that Solo has in his thing. But
I guess here's the better question: which is better, listening to the Monster Mash on vinyl or a gallon
I
of
mean,
freezer burnt chocolate ice cream that those kids had
uh,
to eat?
I mean, if you've never had ice cream, you ever been camping and you're like, wow, this is the best crafted. It's not the best crafted. This is the best food I've ever had in my whole life. It's just like a crappy box of craft dinner. Do you have craft dinner? Do you call it craft dinner in the America?
So we
Yeah,
don't
okay,
call it
right.
KD, but yeah, I've heard of the
Yeah.
KD before. I think we
My
just call it
Canadian, my Canadian snuck out of there.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So Chris, there is so much to get into in this
I'm
episode, and,
excited.
and we've talked both on here and offline about when it comes to these highfalutin prestige TV shows. Some like to do all of the major, climactic moments in the finale. Some like to do it in the penultimate episode because you don't see it coming. Except now we kind of see
Mm.
it coming. And I wouldn't say that we're not going to have big stuff happening in the finale. I think we can certainly talk about what to expect from next week now that it is right in front of us. But I was certainly not expecting this amount of stuff to be dumped into this episode. And it's tough, again, to sort of judge in retrospect of season one, because for what we've been talking about with the pacing, it does kind of feel like, to that KD analogy you made before, we were kind of in the desert for a little bit, especially in Silo 17, and then we just got a big drink of water. And I'm
No,
having a
we
tough
walked
time.
into the room, we walked into the vault, and you're like, oh my god, there's so much here.
Yeah, exactly. So we are. I'm objectively
uh,
trying to think like, okay, there's a lot of great stuff from this episode. How does it compare to season one? Versus, I think both of our perspectives and maybe some of the listeners' perspectives as well. Of like, after this storyline in particular has been so slowly fed to us, we
mhm.
finally get so much stuff in here, and it's really well done.
Yeah, one pasta noodle at a time. But now we get the whole thing. I will say, so I've had a couple people. I feel like over the break, some people were like, catching up on television, watching
Mm,
watching shows, having more time to watch it. My coworkers, some podcast friends I know, and I feel like there was this thing of like either being like, oh, I really like Silo, and they'd be like, yeah, I think it's been like okay, and they'd be like, and then I explain what I thought was good and what I thought was bad. And like, oh, that's basically what I think too. But they come away with this like, no, it's good. Whereas I did have a friend of the pod, Zach Brooks, last night say that like he's like, no, I really appreciate that. Like, I think this has been like pretty tough to get through. That being said, we come on every week after every episode and critique it. And this I feel like is the culmination of a lot of things that we've been getting that I feel like there's a lot of ways in which I think the show, when we like zoom out on it and look at it in the whole, I think will be much kinder to the season than I think we were on individual episodes. Because I do think this episode is the reveal or culmination of a
yeah.
lot of things that even if they have been working or they weren't working, I feel like ended up working in terms of this particular episode. I still will say I do think this is the best episode of Silo, like seasons 1 and season 2. I will say there are moments where I'm like, oh, I don't know if this is totally working for me in the way that I don't think this is like a perfect show. There's one
Hmm.
moment we'll get to in particular, but then by the time we get to the end of the episode, I'm like, oh, I get why they're doing all the things that they're doing, even if I don't love some of the scenes or decisions or like plot points. In its totality, it's like a very good meal we're being served. So yeah, I'm excited to talk through this one with you, Mike.
So particularly when it comes to 17, there's a lot to do, but let's start with where we start, getting sort of the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead sort of third person perspective of essentially the entire Silo 17 storyline from the POV of this brand new gaggle of characters, Grace, these boxcar children in the form of some of these other survivors of the revolution. So we are able to work out over the course of this that it's sort of this ramshackle family unit where it is headed up by Rick and Audrey, who have a baby of their own. In addition, they have this kid, Benny, who is not their son, but kind of treats like their son because he is super young and is the child of this Parent Trap-esque scenario where one of the dads hooked up with one of the moms right before they died. And so they're sort of like, Benny's kind of like each of their half-brothers in a manner of speaking. And then there's always a black sheep in the family. And in this one, Grace, it is Eater. And I feel so bad because we'll find out, sort of the unfortunate tragic backstory behind Eater's nickname. But I could not keep a straight face taking my notes for the vast majority up until that point, with just the idea that in Silo in general, they don't go in the sci-fi direction sometimes where they just go with like a bunch of weird spellings of typical names or just make up names out of a hat seemingly. Silo's pretty good about conventional names that have been carried down from the outside world. The one exception was Eater.
Oh, Solo as well. We have some.
Yeah, but I mean, as we find out in this episode, Solo was not his real name.
Agreed. You did better than me. I will say all of the teens are labeled teen in my notes. Maybe other girl is the one is Eater in my notes. Also, can I just nitpick for a second because I really love this episode. But I didn't know that the boy's name was Rick. But there's another character on the show named Rick. But in the book, there's two characters named Peter, and they changed Peter Billings to Paul Billings because they didn't want to have two Peters on the show. But now we have two Ricks on the show. So that's silly. That's silly to me.
But we have Rick and Audrey, though I would say that Rick is more of the Morty and Audrey is more of the Rick in terms of their dynamic and how reckless this one's.
Oh, geez, we're in a silo, Morty.
Oh, Audrey, I don't think we should shoot Juliette. Shut up, Rick. You're gonna kill him.
Rick and Morty in the silo is pretty good. Yeah, so I don't have any of their names listed, but I will say I love this, like, this part of the world building here, that these kids are left on their own to survive. I feel like there is a way in which, like, I mean, so much of my favorite television and movies are so dark in tone, and this is pretty dark in terms of thinking about, not just because there's very little lighting in the silo, but because, like, this is just awful to think that these kids grow up like on their own, having to live. There's literally a moment where Eater's like, you never had to eat a rat before, huh? It's like,
maybe she's lying about how she got the nickname initially. Maybe she got the nickname because of that she was like, how would eat this rat? They're like, we're not that desperate. We're gonna call you Eater because you're a little bit of a freak.
You can't spell Eater without rat. You have to mix it around a little bit, but it's in there.
Yeah, maybe her name was actually Rattray, and they were like, that's Eater backwards,
or Rat Eater, and then it became like, it's just like, can we like lose the beginning of this?
Well, Eater famously does not know what a last name is. She's like, Cher, only one name.
When my name, I could be Grace Eater as well.
Grace La L Eater.
La Eater. That's the French version. Okay, we're so off.
Yeah, but this is such an interesting concept to me. And on the one hand, I almost kind of feel like if they had somehow done a spin-off of Silo, like, this could have been its own story in and of itself.
Gen V of the boys.
Exactly. And Gen E for Eater. This does feel like almost a separate story entirely from the action. I mean, it quite literally is, of like, they have, after, everything that happened with their parents and Solo, they've kind of been scared off by the boogeyman. And so they've just been living on their own, trying to survive for, I would say, all these years. But again, it's a little tough to judge how long they have been kind of operating as this family unit by themselves. I guess as long as, like, Benny has been around, since he came to them as just a baby. But then what I thought was really interesting was we dive right in, which again is something that's not typically done in Silo 17 this season, and showing that a lot of the odd kind of suspect things from the beginning of our time in Silo 17 this season has been from them. Juliette's rope didn't just snap errantly. They
Right.
cut it.
Right.
And Juliette was also saved in that moment as well. Obviously, we see the entire attack on Solo, how it wasn't that Juliette had the tow line clipped and her air extinguished on purpose. It was just due to the skirmish that was happening,
Mhm.
which I think also helps as well because, look, it's a very Herculean effort on behalf of the writers and the showrunners to like introduce this whole group of people and try to get us to see their POV by the end of this and assumingly moving forward. I think unfortunately as a consequence they do come across as a little tropey,
Mhm.
especially Rick and Audrey, which I'm so sorry to say I did not like this Audrey character. And
Mm.
we
Mhm.
obviously were not supposed to. She's clearly very hot-headed, very dismissive of somebody like Eater, very much from that perspective, like we've talked about with several people in power in the show Silo, as like, I'm in charge and I know what's best and I'm not going to listen to any other opinions. Her opinion is more so kill anything with a pulse to get what we want.
Yeah. So I would agree that I feel like, again, I think that the thing that Silo struggles with the most is basically like the edges of like anything that's outside of what they're like the main focus of the show is where and that's so strong and I think lifts up so much of the show. Like we'll get to like Juliet and Solo scenes later, which are by far the best thing in this episode, in my
Yep.
opinion.
Yep.
I think everything else sort of struggles. I think there's this other thing that happens, and I talked about this last week, that in the book, the reveal of it there being kids in the silo, like like basically Solo says like I saw a man, he looks like me, and so then Juliet is on the lookout for like a bearded man, like an
Mm-hmm.
old man, and then she comes across these kids. It's like what the hell, and
I
then
dare you think about
realizes
Steve Zahn like that. I think
sorry.
he's sprightly 50 something, if I
He's
can wager any.
57. He's
Okay.
57. Which again, I'm gonna talk a little bit about mostly that it just confuses me a little bit in terms of the thing. I feel like this is the thing I think the show doesn't do that well is the like getting to the conclusion that they want us to get to. Ultimately, the scene we get to is phenomenal.
Right,
But
like the Kaiser Soze of it all, of trying to do the
yeah,
math.
yeah. Literally, she looks like the person in that math meme. But it's like it's all it's just like, oh my god, he was a boy. It's like, well, why couldn't he have been like? Anyway, doesn't matter. I feel like the book is a little bit stronger in terms of the kid. It's almost in immediately like Juliet is like a mother figure to them, and I feel like that would have been extra strong. I felt like because of the fact that they gender swapped Walker and she has this mother figure, and then if she immediately get and maybe that's tropey and stereotypical and like outdated in terms of like
Or is just going to happen inevitably, just not when they first meet.
that's true. So it's still an episode away. It being a little more confrontational. I feel like in the book, it's easier to imagine them more as like lost little kids, which I think doesn't maybe when you actually see it, like they had to have survived in some way. So it maybe doesn't like that didn't work as well in terms of the execution of the way that they did it in the show. Ultimately, I think it's like fine. I think the idea that like they would be I feel like pretty traumatized from being like and the thing I talked about with like Solo that's a little hard is like you almost need him to be social enough and desperate for the interaction more so than like even these kids like at least he grew up having like until he was the age where the rebellion happened like pretty normally ish. These kids have had no like adults like no other social interaction. But I don't mind the world where like some of them are really defensive and worried about what it means, kind of like Solo has been, where and then you have this other person who's like clinging on to Juliet, being like, "Oh, you might be my answer to like get out of here," which worked for me at least.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, and it is more so, I think, the inevitability of like, they're eventually going to meet in the middle, or at least Audrey's going to
Yeah,
de escalate
yeah,
enough. I mean, this also, again, goes to show the message that the show has hit home time and time again, and will continue to do in this episode of the idea of propaganda and sort of like running with a message of assigning a label to a person and sort of, holding so much weight on them because of that, that it colors everything you do. That the reason why you could argue Audrey was so aggressive towards Solo is because she thought, oh my God, this is the man that killed our
yeah,
parents in
yeah.
cold blood. When, like, look, I wouldn't say it was as ruthless as she was painting. He certainly did do it. And you could argue, actually, in retrospect, in probably a much more cold-blooded way than actually shooting and killing them, instead having them essentially asphyxiate to death. But at the same time, Juliet is able to really serve as that connector by really bridging these two stories and really vocalizing what I thought was such a great line in the midst of this big, climactic scene between the group, which is talking about Solo. He was 12 when the rebellion happened. He wasn't old enough to be responsible for all this. I was really expecting Audrey to like fire back, being like, listen, it was old enough for me, because I think that's the POV that she comes up with. But interestingly, I feel like they zig a little bit and say that's actually going to put them more on the same page, because Audrey and Rick understand the weight that can come with being thrust into this leadership position, in watching your own parents die, some would say through your own inaction or due to circumstances, and basically having to pick things up from where they left off and move on, despite the fact that you are in an age that objectively should not need to do so.
Well, what I think works in the episode actually is that like they basically do this to they say they're going to kill these two people, and like I know obviously like Solo killed their parents, but like they do attack these, so this like idea of like being defensive and like protective, I feel like is ultimately like we see it in the show. So then I feel like, as much as you could say like she didn't act like she does act at least to Juliet in that way. And so I like that by the end of the episode, actually, we do get on the same page. And to, just that's my like instinct from a storytelling perspective, is like, I do, as much as I like dark stuff, the reason I resonate so much with dark stuff is mostly that I really love when then there's that like light at the end of the tunnel moment,
Right.
of like come together. That's how you like, love for one another is how you get through those really dark moments in your life. That's what I really like. So I like the story. I think I just got to stick on the scene where we reveal Solo's backstory. Again,
Yeah.
I don't like the like she's doing the math and reflecting on these moments that where he's like, I am the shadow, blah 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 blah. But ultimately, to get to the scene where it is revealed that he is the son of the head of IT, and the don't let anybody in, and Solo interpreting that as like, I have to protect the vault, when Juliet realizes, no, he was doing that to save you, like you, the individual person, is so good. And then that to me makes every moment about Solo needing to get back to the vault, needing to protect it, killing, like honestly killing these kids' parents, like that to me is so effective as it's just this thing of a deeply personal character moment that only happens in the world where they live in a silo, where there's a vault and they can't leave, or they all die, right? Like it's the fatherly instinct to protect your son, all wrapped up in the sci-fi conceit, is what makes it incredibly good television, because it's personal and relatable in the sense of like, yeah, what, like a father protecting his son, but it has this weird sci-fi trope element that's like it works. It's just so good.
We're 9 episodes for this season. How have we never done a pun on Silo Philo?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I cannot gush enough about this scene. This is far and away the best work that Rebecca Ferguson and Steve Zahn have done in this season,
Yeah.
specifically together. To your point about sort of coming to that epiphany, I don't know. It was something that I personally had assumed based on that entire conversation that she flashes back to, of like, oh, I remember this girl, that she was in my class. And she's like,
I know.
were you that old? And he's like, never mind. Like, I don't know.
It's funny because there's a moment earlier in the show when Knox is like, I know who the traitor is. I'm like, wait, what? And then there's this moment I'm like, wait, you didn't figure it out earlier, immediately after that thing happened? Like, I feel like the level of getting to the realization is...
She has a lot in her mind. I will also say, even from outside this scene, I am obsessed with Rebecca Ferguson's like over it dynamic, which she had with Eater, where it was like picking up where Solo went off of, okay, I am trying to help you and get you food and save this man's life, and you are distracting me by asking what a last name is, and just like the way she rolled her eyes over like, Don't care about this expository bullshit. Really don't. Just trying to look for a way to save the day for the
really
time.
Felt like a meeting I've been in where like I feel like I'm 4 steps ahead of some of the and I'm like, no, that's right. Like we will do that thing, but we're also over here. We're gonna do this thing over here, you know?
But it all came together in such a perfect moment because I mean, let's look at, as on the nose as it is, the metaphor of don't let anyone into the vault. That Solo has been, despite these moments of vulnerability, an incredibly guarded character. Someone who was hesitant. The first encounter he has with Juliette, much like these kids, is, all right, well, don't come in or I'm going to kill you. Just like defensive out the wazoo. And it felt like every time he took a step forward, it was then 2 steps back. Where like, okay, he opens up to Juliette about being the shadow, but then flies into a rage when she insists that that was not the case. And again, what I really love about what the show did was that in the moment, it baked in this, wanton danger of, oh no, Solo is the one that could snap at any point in time. Look what he was able to do. I think we were really following that line of logic, only to find out, like, no, it really was him kind of externalizing and internalizing a lot of this grief. That, like, he was given this one order, and even though he felt like he followed it, he felt like a coward because he was just this kid. But damn it, he should have known better, especially now that he's older. Why did he do that? Why did he lock these 2 people in a vault and have them die? Which I think is probably more traumatizing than having your dad shot in front of you. But really, 6 eggs in one hand, half a dozen in the other, even though these kids don't know what eggs are. But
the difference between it with his dad, the reason why it's trauma is because he could have opened the vault and saved his dad.
Yes.
Right. So like, this is so good in the fact that he feels like he both succeeded and failed. And therefore he has this arrested development about in both senses.
He made a huge mistake.
I made a huge mistake. I don't know what else I was expecting. There's definitely a bag that says "Dead Dove, do not eat" in Solo's.
No, Reader has that. She wants to dig into that dove.
That's right. So he both has the thing that his dad told him to do, and he has these moments where he is searching for connection with Juliet. I feel like there is a world where I think that, like, one way you could have critiqued the show before was like, would he really be somebody who would be craving connection? I feel like as soon as you see this moment, you can be like, yeah, like he would be. I think it's incredibly well done.
Yeah, and I think what is so interesting is, again, we talked about the duplicity that might exist in, oh my God, he's not really Solo, so did he take someone else's name? But it seems like my read of it, Grace, was that more so this was an identity he adopted because he felt like he didn't deserve to carry forward his family name. Again, we talk about the last name. I think he felt so ashamed by what he did that he's like, I cannot be Jimmy anymore. He sort of talks in the third person to Juliette when he says Jimmy was a coward, but he kind of doesn't at the same time. I think he has truly separated himself from that, but also not as well. We see all these times when he would like fly into these adolescent-esque tantrums whenever he felt like he screwed something up. Now, again, it makes more sense because there is this habitually years-long building self-flagellation of like, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I screwed this up. Of course I would get this wrong, which honestly was very resounding from my perspective.
Well, he almost, I mean, the dual personality thing, he almost has 2 personalities. And as the son of his father, he failed. He says something like, does that sound like what a hero would do, or the son of a hero would do?
Yeah.
And so when he is in that mode, he sees himself as a failure. When he is the shadow of the head of IT protecting the vault, he is successful until he thinks that he's not. And then therefore, like, he's already kind of like thrown away the idea and this version of Jimmy who was not a good son because he let his father die. And so he's abandoned all of any of that identity and held on to this other identity. And what happens when the identity that you've held on to because you thought you were a failure, you start to think that you're failing? It suddenly makes every moment where he wants to get back to the vault, where he thinks that she's going to steal everything from the vault, that he thinks he's going to ruin everything, much more meaningful, because this is a classic example of like, well, if I did all that if I gave away all of that stuff, if I let my dad die, then what am I? And then I failed at the thing I was supposed to be doing. Then what's been the point of all of it? So I think it's just like incredibly powerful storytelling. It's incredible character work from Steve Zahn, and Rebecca Ferguson. I think like without
Rebecca Ferguson. I mean,
Juliette.
yeah, it's so great because we talk about this, that Juliette has, to say she has a hardened exterior would be an understatement, but we've seen through moments specifically with George last season that there is that tenderness underneath, that despite the fact that she puts up her own walls, that if you have the right code, you'll be able to get in. You just have to try 3 times a day. And so she is able, and look, it's also the fact that she is the child of a doctor as well. She kind of has good bedside manner skills, especially in this moment when she realizes that this is someone that has been going through something and is going through something right now. And especially compared to obviously Audrey's "give me the vault code or you die" perspective, she is able to realize that she has been approaching him entirely incorrectly this entire time. And so I just thought it was such a nice, warm way to see the character as well, where it felt like for the first time, actually a rare couple times, when she's able to make this initial appeal to Solo in episode 3, when he first comes out to meet her, like, it felt like she was meeting him on his level there, but this felt like for the first time in a long time, she was doing that too. And whether it was also due to like the transactional nature of like, fine, I'll help you with the freaking pump so I get my suit back. This felt like it was an opportunity for her to kind of like stop down and breathe and be like, I have been reading this guy wrong the entire time. This is not Jimmy. This is Solo, but I need to remind him of who Jimmy is, because that's going to essentially allow him to quite literally open up the doors to these other people by her essentially looking at these kids and saying like, does this not look a little familiar to you? You want to prove you're a hero? Break the freaking cycle. Be a person to these kids that you wish had been there for you in your time of need.
Yeah, it's really good. We talked earlier in the season. I feel like we've gotten away from it a little bit, but there is this thing where Juliette is both very prickly, and I think you can see that in the the eye rolling nature of some of the interactions with Solo and then Eater as well. But in season 1, she makes so many connections to people that really propels her forward throughout the season. It basically starts with George. You basically have God, I can't believe I'm forgetting the first sheriff's name, but that's okay.
Yeah,
Holston, and then Lucas as well. And so it really is her ability to like and Walker also, like her ability to connect with people, that is in her skill set. And I feel like this is like a lock that she's been trying to pick that has not quite been working, and it's this last piece of information that she gets that she's like, oh, that's it. And it really does come down to, she still does need to convince him that it's the right thing to do to let them into the vault. She's even at the beginning of her conversation when they let her go see him, she's still trying like, don't worry, we're just going to get food and then we're going to leave. And that's still not working. She has to get so deeper in to basically say like, no, like your dad would be proud of you. You did exactly what he told you to do. It's like you succeeded as a son, as a human being, not just as like the shadow of the head of IT. Like, you're good, and we can save you and these people and everybody else in my silo. That's what doing a good job is. So she nails it. She's really good in the scene.
Yeah, because again, I think it's really interesting how for the past few episodes it has been so businesslike of like,
Right.
I will do this thing for you because you are going to do this thing for me. And we're going to get this really warm moment later on once the vault is opened of him mentioning to her like, okay, well, the thing that really clued you in was you finding my dad's IT suit in his locker. You could have just left right there. We could have cut to episode 10. Why did you choose not to? And
this is good.
And she doesn't respond. And I think it goes to show that maybe she has learned as well. And to your point, she has certainly showcased this in the past, but you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And I think she brought in a whole dollop of honey into this conversation, realizing that the way to broach Solo has not been the way that she's been doing it for essentially this entire season, but to meet him with who he spurns, yet who he is at the end of the day, which is Jimmy, which is a little bit of, to your point, this kid kind of frozen in time. I mean, even opening the vault, I agree with you. I love getting to see this much light and joy from this type of show, to the point that it made me so nervous if the rug would be pulled out from under us in this episode. Not yet as of the least, but even just the set decoration of, again, we
It's
have
so
seen,
good.
yeah, we've seen the 18 version, right, of how cold and sterile the vault is, and then the voluminous library of the Legacy. And to see how Solo has kind of made it his own, but it's not this typical like messy teenage room like you might expect, again, from his youthfulness. It is a place of knowledge. He has stuck all around him all of these pages from the Legacy. He's writing chemical formulas around. He's made like little dioramas of himself. He made a model ship. Like, it made so much sense as to, you and I wondered for a while, what does the vault look like on the inside? This would be the place of somebody who, again, felt like, my dad didn't die in vain. It is my mission to become the head of IT now, to become the Shadow. And that means, much like we see with Lucas, learning as much as possible. And he has devoted his livelihood to that, to the point where it is the first thing he sees in the morning and the last thing he sees at night.
It's so fun. I don't know how to describe this, but I think that the scene where he's like talking about his dad is obviously like I think the best acted, but I do think it delights me to no end. I will rewatch the scene of him being like, "Yeah, I was building the boat," and he holds the boat up. It's like it's so cute, it's so good.
Yeah, or him being like, "Oh no, it's okay. It makes noise. They're drums. Let me show you."
It's so funny when they're dropping things. It's both the like he's so excited to show everything, but he's also very nervous that people will like break the things that he has. This is so good. Every inch of the wall being covered by something pulled out of a notebook. Like it's so good. I do just want to go back to the moment where Solo and Juliette, he says, so first of all, it's very funny. The breaking of the tension when she's
Yeah.
like, "There's another suit," and he's like, "Yeah," and she's like, "You could have told me. I did get like shot by an arrow and almost died." And he has to like cover up his laugh because he knows that she's joking.
I thought for a second he was gonna give like a shocked face, like, "Oh my
No,
god, that happened to you?"
no, so good, so good. Um, I feel like I'm coming from a family that like for a long time we were not as expressive with love as we should have been, and it
Mhm,
took something sort of pretty tragic in our family to happen where we started to like really make sure we were saying "I love you" at the end of every phone call and telling each other
mhm.
love each other. There are still times where like you can feel it in our family that there's that like little bit of like, oh, it's awkward. So I really resonate with when he says, "Why didn't you leave?" And she doesn't answer. And he can't look at her. He turns and then puts his hand on her shoulder. And that
Right.
is his way of saying, like, "I love you," basically, like, thank you, is so powerful to me. I think it's so good. I think there are times, obviously, in media where I want the big hug, the big embrace, the like, "I love you," the really like expression of gratitude. But I thought it was really perfect for these characters who like don't
Yes.
actually really know each other that well. And they both are dealing with trauma and a lot of things going on that like how they said "I love you" or how I said they thank each other is a hand on the shoulder and like tears in their eyes. I thought it was so powerful and so good.
That's the thing. I think sometimes even the smaller the gesture, the more powerful. And to your point,
Right.
I think it's very characteristic for these two, where like Solo definitely is a bit more of an extrovert, maybe due to the fact that he hasn't interacted with people for a while. But he also is someone that is still a little guarded at the end of the day, despite how open he is. And obviously, we've talked about Juliet, that maybe with one exception, she's not really much of an affectionate person. And so, even in that moment, what's interesting is that she turns away when he
Mhm,
asks her, like, why did you do
mhm.
that? Because I don't think she can even vocalize, despite how far her character has come, like,
Yeah.
well, it's because I care about you and I wanted your life to be saved. Like, you didn't deserve to die at the hands of these people. Instead, they just kind of let it linger, but
Mhm.
the understanding is mutual. You know, it's like you don't need to say anything. And that's kind of, I think, what that gesture meant to me when he puts his hand in her. But the fact that they're facing in opposite directions, I think, again, sets up it's so representative of their character dynamic, which is like they're standing in line but facing in completely opposite directions. And I think we'll also assumingly speak to what happens in episode 10, when I imagine now at the pace we're moving, all of a sudden, we're gonna have her leaving the silo.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think so. It's good too, like the way that they determine this, they're kind of now moving in different directions as well. Like
Exactly.
actually like really. So yeah, it's just really strong. I just love that moment so much. On top of him being like, "Oh my god, you guys don't know what music is. Like, let me put on music." It's so
And of
fun.
all things, he puts on the monster
I
mash.
love
He's
it.
like, you
I love
kids like this, right?
he's such a kid. I feel like he does remind me of a certain type of kid. Like I was a camp director, and these kids who are like voracious, like like they want to just know things, but then also want to tell people. And I actually think that that does line up with if you had access to almost every bit of recorded documented history, the way in which you might actually want to tell people, like there's early on in the show, it's one of my favorites in season 2, is when he's talking about he's talking about elephants, right? I believe, of
Yes,
like,
he is.
elephants are yeah, and it's just that fits so well once you see the inside of the room, that this is a man who wants not only to know as much, and probably mostly out of boredom, like what else are you going to do, but then to like relay all this information, like he's like, you know, this fact I learned, it's he would be a great podcaster, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be a little all over the place, but like give him sort of like one of those interviews where you just kind of put him down in a room and have him rant every week. Could
Yeah.
be very fun. Yeah, what I really enjoy about this, and it's tough to say ending because there is a world, I think, where like this is where Silo 17 kind of ends. It's this happy ending where we sort of have, it's tough to say because this group of kids were kind of already their own familiar unit, but this feels more like a family reunited. You know, it's like that Juliette was able to have a little bit of the chocolate and peanut butter mixed together of like, well, Solo is seeking people to interact with, and these kids have been quite literally starved of so much stuff in their life. Now they get to find one another and seemingly now live together and, you know, try to fill Silo 17, if not with outright resources, with at least a sense of community. But what is so interesting as well is, you know, in Silo 18, we have Kathleen Billings say at one point to her husband, like, we have a right to know about what came before us. And looking at Silo 17 is such a great example of that, right? And that Bernard showcases how secretive the legacy is. That, like, okay, the only people who know about this are me and the Shadow, and nobody else in the 10,000 people have any idea what this is. Even Lucas's old mother says it's better to ignorance is bliss, better to live with your head in the sand. And here in Silo 17, that shows that that's not the case. He's going in and showing off all of these relics, all of these vestiges of the past. And so far, at least, there are no adverse effects from it. Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And I think that not only was there joyousness contained in Solo getting to sort of relive a lot of these past epiphanies through these children of like, yeah, this is a Nickelodeon. It spins and it moves around. Isn't this a lot of fun? But at the same time, I think it represents the possibility of what could be. That, ironically enough, despite how derelict Silo 17 is, it kind of seems like that scene is what Silo 18 wants, at least a lot of characters, right? Which is like, we want to know as much as possible. They're keeping us from knowing these things, and we have a right to know about it.
Yeah, Camille talks about this of like, you know, we need to know, like, when you're looking at the relic of like what the world is, and they're trying to like figure that out. I do think like there is this thing that very early on in the show sort of establishes that like, oh, we obviously learn that like the fake vision of what they see, which is like the fake vision of the world outside being luscious and green, is false. And then you think like, well, then why do they even do that if they could just say that? Because they basically, when they're saying like, when they're doing the thing that they say before the people have to go out and clean, they basically are telling the truth that like, you can't go outside, and today, you know, there might be a day where we can, but today is not that day. The like fundamental belief of seemingly whoever is in charge is that humanity is stupid, and humanity cannot know the truth because they will serve to destroy themselves. That is the fundamental belief of clearly whoever built the silos, or at least whoever is in charge of the current silos, as opposed to this other belief that with all the information that we could make choices, that sometimes we would get those choices wrong, but that in the long run we would prevail in terms of like developing and moving towards a place where maybe we could go outside again. And I do feel like that's like the fundamental difference between whoever is in control of the silo and what a future version of independence or rebellion could be, in that there basically is this like pessimistic version of humanity, and there's an optimistic version of humanity. And I do think that that's pretty simple in terms of like the type of story you can tell, but it is an effective one, I think, because I think there are people who think that like, you know, that is the way we're like, do we trust that humanity can like save the world from climate change, or do we think that like we're doomed to fail it? Like, I think it's a pretty interesting like question to posit in the show. I obviously have a belief of which one is true. I think humanity is so dumb. No, I'm just kidding.
Finally, Grace, say the quiet part out loud. One more thing I want to talk about with 17 before we move on to 18 here, because I know we spent a good while on this, but again, so good, how can we not, is going back to this continual theme we've talked about of generations and what you carry down from what has happened beforehand. I think looking at the denizens of Silo 17 is such an interesting lesson of, again, how to look at what was done by, our parents is not necessarily something that we need to do, despite the assumption. The idea that Solo is going off of his father's last wishes, which was do not open the vault under any circumstances. I think he learns by the end of this that is something you should not do, because that is quite literally starving people to death and keeping them out, and again denying themselves, just denying them this sort of existence through your own action or inaction. But I think from the kid's perspective too, especially finding out, the reason why when Audrey decides to go less aggro is when Solo tells the truth about not only the fact that yes, he did, make some hasty moves and kill their parents, but it was only after they broke into the vault and like shot this 12-year-old kid to
Right.
get food. And so I
Right.
think it was a little bit of an eye-opening experience for them as well, much like we talked about with Juliette finding out more about her mother in season 1 of you think about your parents in one way, it's sort of like a two-dimensional, for a lot of us, can do no wrong type of figure. And when you figure out that's not the case, when you realize that they are living, breathing humans just as we all are and are definitely prone to making mistakes, at least from my perspective, I certainly experienced this becoming a father myself. It changes the way that you view your parents. And I think it also sometimes shifts your world beliefs from an innate childhood sense of like, well, I'm just gonna, my parents taught me how to do this and they can do no wrong. So let me just keep doing what I was taught, versus, okay, they've made their mistakes and I'm going to make sure that I don't make the same one. So I thought that was just a really salient theme that carried through with both of these groups, basically two different generations within Silo 17, essentially learning the same lesson at the same time.
It's very good. I like that a lot. I like that the episode title is called The Safeguard, which I think we'll see why it's called that. But I feel like you can also apply that to like that's basically what Solo's dad does. Like he creates a safeguard to prevent people getting into the.
I mean,
into the
Solo
vault.
is the
He's
safeguard.
the
He
safeguard.
guards
That's
the
right.
safe.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It's very fun. No, that's really good. I think in terms of like pinpointing a theme, this generational thing, which especially I think plays into the fact that like Quinn seemingly like erases history to make sure that people can't just like repeat the mistakes of the people before them. Yeah, that's really good. It's really fun.
All right, well, let's do what we usually do, Grace. Add one and add a lot of characters, though maybe not as many as we thought, considering how many characters we added in Silo 17. Let's talk about Silo 18 here, and we got to continue on the answer train with Lucas. And to like chart the trajectory of this character is so wild, Grace, where season 1 and season 2 are both kind of on parallel tracks where it's like, no Lucas, no Lucas, no Lucas, and then he shows up and his role gets absolutely huge.
I
And
know.
so,
Literally, I was like, guess the way it happened in the book isn't happening, so I spoiled it. And then it's like, guess what? He shows back up the next episode, and he's like the most important character in Silo 18.
yeah, because we're going to find out a lot about him, not only, again, as this sort of repository of exposition as he continues to go on this search for answers, but also as a person a little bit, right? We get a little bit of a touch into his home life. We have him interacting with his mom, who's like, how come you're so smart?
Hey,
why do you want to keep looking for things?
families, generation. She's like, don't be an idiot. This is right. He's like, no, I got to do something different.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to hear his perspective about how he feels, like how he has some blood on his hands for what happened to Juliette, that like she took everything on the chin, and had he joined in with her a bit at the end of season 1, her expedition to like recover the hard drive and everything, things would have gone differently. I think the only thing that would have gone differently would have been that he would not have been sent to the mines. He would have been one of those people with a bag over their head like Patrick Kennedy in that, torture asylum.
Yeah. But Lucas makes great progress this episode.
Yeah, so what's
Yeah.
interesting is we find out that, again, as much of a bastion as Salvador Quinn is, as we talked about last week, some people view him as a hero, some as the villain. There is some stuff that people don't know about Salvador Quinn, even Bernard. And Bernard's paying a little bit for hiring Lucas on, essentially, because Lucas has wisened up enough. He really took Quinn's message to heart last time of like, basically don't completely disclose everything to this guy, especially when he's so rude, Grace, as to like, Lucas comes in with, for him, this ground shaking epiphany of, oh my God, we're not the only silo. There are 50 of them. And Bernard's like, actually, there are 51, and I already know that. Keep moving. I want actual answers.
You loser, you nerd. Do you know what I like is this thing that we've seen a couple times in the season of Bernard needing to use other people, but it being his downfall, which is essentially, when I go back to the themes of like optimism in humanity versus pessimism in humanity, Bernard has a pessimism in humanity, but his undoing is that he always needs people. And then those people end up being like, you haven't seen his downfall, but you presume this will not go perfectly for Bernard, in the fact that Lucas has uncovered something that, as far as the person who speaks over the whatever sound system they have working down below, Bernard has not been down there. He's not visited down
he's
there.
not experienced the algorithm.
Yeah, so his like, he needs people, but his fundamental worldview of like they're idiots proves to be like his kind of one of his fatal flaws here.
Well, culminating in the fact that the big tip that Quinn is going to reveal to Lucas is going to have him going to the down deep, a place for, I think, many reasons Bernard would not go down, not only due to the fact that he's public enemy #1 down there, but I think he sticks with the attitude that's kind of been ascribed to Mechanical from the beginning of the series, which is like, yeah, they help keep the lights on, but we don't really think about them as people. They help us get the job done, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Lucas gets his hands dirty here, and it visits a location that was one of the big, I think, open questions at the end of season 1, right? Which was like when they had the schematic of the silo, and there's like basically a big question mark at the bottom. They're like, oh, what's here at the bottom of the silo? And again, looking towards this theme of propaganda, I can think of no better way to represent it in this episode than, okay, they look down and there is this seemingly giant pool of water. Well, why do you believe that we'll drown if we go down there? Well, it just looks really deep, so we're not going to touch it whatsoever. And Lucas is like, I bet if I drop down there, it's not going to be that deep. And Shirley's like, all right, your funeral. Tell me any last minute character things that I need to know to possibly start a rebellion.
That's so funny. That was so funny.
It
He's
turns
like,
out
I'm going to die.
That Lucas has this fantastic moment where it drops into the water, and then he stands up and it's waist deep. Like, that is really a lot of Silo's messaging in a nutshell, Grace, about messaging.
I mean, this is the thing that I think why this episode is so good. It's not just that like there are these moments that are so memorable and the acting is so good, but thematically it's so strong. Of like the literally, I mean, it does seem silly, but like, the silo, like the fact that you're going down, like the descent, like all of the metaphors that you can apply to Silo. Like there often are these times where like a sci-fi thing will come up and you're like, oh, I can't believe nobody's like done that before, in terms of like, which I'm sure like iterations of it have been done, but this particular moment of like being told one thing, going down, and then only like he doesn't drown. Like it's really good. It's smart. I do love that he finds the tunnel. And this voiceover is just like, oh, thank God, I've been meaning to say all the other people who, like, it's just so long. Nobody ever comes down here. These are the people who are here before you. I keep telling this thing
to characters and they keep dying.
Please don't tell anybody. Which presumably is that Meadows never says, right? She never reveals to Bernard.
Yeah, so the algorithm says that 3 people have been to visit it in the tunnel. We've got Salvador Quinn, Meadows, which I imagine is like partially, again, on this path of she was the one that had the version of the pact that was taking down all these coded messages, and Lucas. So it's very fun that this version of the pact is sort of like a lending library book, or like a Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, where like the person who finds it afterwards is like, oh, what's this code? I guess I need to find out what's in it. But the fact that this information, much like Salvador
I'm
Quinn,
so excited for Lucas's mom to go on the adventure.
She's like, I don't need it. Just burns the book immediately. But let's get into the titular safeguard here, as this is one of the messages that Salvador Quinn has left behind. The founders didn't build a single silo. They built 50, and they created the safeguard. And then the safeguard gets brought up at the end when Lucas ends up approaching this, like, again, fun sci-fi, like archaic looking tunnel, but with almost a HAL-esque robotic voice of the algorithm saying, okay, if you tell anybody about what you've seen here, we'll have no choice but to initiate the safeguard. Do you know what the safeguard is, Mr. Kyle? And Lucas says, I do. And so now they're married. It's going to make things very complicated when Juliette comes back. Now it's going to be a bit of a love triangle. But let's talk about this safeguard, Grace. And I would say let's safeguard from
Yeah.
book spoilers. Let's purely speculate from a show perspective.
What I like about this is like they just added a whole new mystery, right? In the penultimate episode of like I don't know, I don't if I read the book, I don't believe I know what the answer to this thing is. So this is very fun, and I think you could go one of two ways. Is this rebellion, or is this like basically like not propaganda, but like the threat of whoever created the silos? I think it's very fun to think about whether or not this is in the vein of Salvador Quinn, whether this is something that is done to like, I mean, Salvador Quinn does both things. He's both calling out that this is like, you know, a futile setup, that it's like being controlled, but also needed to make sure that people didn't foolishly launch into a rebellion that would get themselves killed. So is it part of is it something that would unlock, you know, the fascist
Right.
control of the silo, or is it something that maintains and keeps fascist control of the silo? Is very fun, I think, to throw at the end of the first season here.
Right, it's the cleaning, right? It's this
Right.
idea of, okay, does it work because of like, is it true that the safeguard has never been launched because Meadows and Quinn kept it secret and didn't tell anybody? Or is it all a farce? Is it just something that's set up as like, a punishment from a parent saying, okay, if you do this, I'm taking away your TV. And then they actually don't carry through with it. It's just enough to keep them in line. Like, listen, the Losty in me, Grace, is going back to a couple of things here. I mean, the first thing I think of when I think of the safeguard is the hatch and pushing the button and that
Mm.
season-long debate that happened as
Mhm.
to, is the button even real? Are we preventing anything from happening? Or is this just a way to keep us in line? And it turns out that it was the former, that there was something in place. So maybe it's because I'm kind of hoping for like a big cataclysmic event. I would imagine that the safeguard is real. What I think the safeguard is like a self-destruct sequence. Because we know, it's officially been confirmed, that there are 50, actually 51 silos. And so it could be possible that obviously not all of them are operational. And maybe the reason they aren't is because people have broken the safeguard in the past. And so the protocol for whoever made these silos is like, well, if they know too much, it just goes boom. And so that could also create a really interesting set of stakes moving forward, too, of like, Juliette feels like Silo 18 is on a ticking clock as it is, because everyone is pushing to get out of the airlock where they're all going to die. What if we literally assign a ticking clock to it and say, okay, you've broken the safeguard, people know too much, so now we're essentially going to have to destroy this and move on to the next one?
So I think that that's right. I think that the safeguard is a real thing, that I think that at some point, like, I don't think this is Chekhov's safeguard of like this, whatever the safeguard is, will at least be attempted to be implemented. I think that so there's the world where it could be like, oh, now we got to get everyone back to Silo 17. Like we have to like, which doesn't even seem feasible. So I think more likely either this season, or it's like a cliffhanger because we know that the show got renewed. And I always do think about like, we didn't know this show was renewed when the season started, and so when they were making it. But I always do feel like there must be like people involved in the making of Silo who are feeling like, oh, we have something here, and like are getting notion like, yeah, it's not guaranteed that's going to be renewed, but like, you know, I imagine they're like, you could put it a cliff, like if they're asked like, can we do a cliffhanger, should we like end it definitively, it's like, yeah, you could probably do a cliffhanger, you know, like some Apple executive is being like, yeah, you good. So I don't know that this will happen for whether this is like the safeguard becomes a major thing next month, or it's more of a like the threat, like a cliffhanger, or it's a thing that gets it, like it's here so that it will be used in the future. My imagining, it's like, it's kind of like, can we stop the bomb from exploding, you know?
Yeah.
Can we like, and I do feel like now Lucas will be on the mission. Although what's interesting, I really love that he says the last line is ideal, like he does know what the safeguard is, which is very fun to think about. Like if he does know what it is, now he can be try to play around it. I think this is a perfect mystery thing to throw in, because as I've said before, there's one central mystery to the show, and this gets us closer to trying to figure that out without giving us really any more information. It's like the perfect type of thing to throw in, of like, clearly now Lucas, I think, is up against not just Silo 18 and the control Silo 18, he is now up against, I think, every set, like whoever runs all the silos. So it's the perfect thing, I think, to add in here at this particular moment in the show.
Well, we're at the bottom of the silo. I want to work our way up and talk about the deprogramming of Paul Billings, as he is just now pretty willy-nilly with this one page he kept. Like, yeah, you know what? Everybody can see
Willie
it.
Billings.
I'll do what Juliette did last season, like put a scan it into a computer and just put it on a display for everybody to see. Because again, I was hesitant that like this character would truly jump the way that he did, considering that he dipped his toes into the waters in a manner of speaking earlier when he's like, all right, I'm not going to arrest Knox and Shirley right now because there was something sketchy going on with Meadow's death. But like his exchange with Sims of, you kept trying to toe the line and Billings replies, the line moved, is a fantastic display of how far this character has come. The exchange was Sims saying, you really crossed the line, gone over to the other side. Billings says, I didn't cross the line moved. And then I think that really represents his character in that, like, he still does stick steadfast to like, all right, I still have some core beliefs that I need to exist in as a person or else I will just disintegrate. But I acknowledge the fact that the boundaries in which I can operate have greatly expanded since the season started.
The other thing I just want to give the show kudos for is I do feel like the ecosystem on this side, I feel like this is the first episode I felt like, okay, I'm here. I was along for it, but I do feel like it's like Billings and Shirley are talking.
Yeah, I'm loving mixing these characters together. Totally
Billings
agree.
gets suggests talking to Camille. Camille gets the relic. Like all of this, I thought is like the best version of this that we've seen so far. I do really like this Sims Billings interaction. I think it is strong here, and this is, I think, the idea of like there not being any communication going up and down, then there being a mole. How do you get stuff up and down? And then the fact that Billings says he sent a message up to Sims. I thought all this was really, really good, culminating in their conversation, and then the follow-up conversation where we get with Robert and Camille, the Sims, where they do say
it's much like Eater that is never going to go away. The fact that they're the Sims.
The Sims, and I thought it was weird when they had the big thing, the oblong thing, the pyramid over their head.
I thought for a second that we'll see what happens with the tunnel. Lucas is kind of caught in the way that a lot of us very nefarious people behaved in The Sims, where you put him in the pool and you take the ladder away. Lucas is kind of in that situation right now.
And I believe like if you're not on the right settings, like I think most people are on the dub settings, but if you want to watch the subtitle one where they go blah 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 blah, that's how they talk. The Sims.
That was Salvador Quinn's coded message. He was speaking Simlish.
That'd be amazing. Their conversation about picking a side, if that was really good, and it's basically what everybody thought it was, which is like they. Although I did think, again, to the credit of the show, there is more gray than it is like nefarious evil for the sake of power. There was this thing of like, if we don't do this, like our son potentially doesn't have a future. Like he deserves to know. There was like a nice little touch in terms of like them finally seeing the relic, really giving them some clarity about like, yeah, that's what they've been trying to do. They've been trying to play both sides to basically potentially stoke a rebellion that ends up with Sims being in charge, which I think is where we're going. Although I know some people who are book readers have some thoughts about how the roles of people could get switched up a little bit. If you know, you know. But I thought I think this is pretty good in terms of like, this is at least a level that I think it's like good compared to what we've been getting previously.
Yeah,
so I'm happy.
And I really like sort of like the chain in which stuff has been passed up through these kind of two couples, right? That like Paul had this page, he passed it off to Kathleen sort of by force, and then he wants to get to Camille because Knox and Shirley tell him like that's basically the only pseudo ally we have up there, and of course Billings has now been cut off due to listening in on Walker. He has officially been let go of the position. He knows that the sheriff is gone. And so Billings is now going to communicate through Sims, maybe not necessarily realizing that these two are now on the same page, quite literally. And it allows them to say, all right, we've picked our side in the rebellion. I know that some people had a bit of back and forth in our comments as to like whether Camille and Sims were playing both sides. I don't know. I still think they were. I would compare it to like, entertaining multiple job offers and just waiting to see which has the better benefits and saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to go with this one after all.
I mean, we're from the reality TV world where I feel like people don't play the middle to with like and then not try to win, like right
Mm-hmm.
in a reality show when you're in the and sometimes you can do it, sometimes you don't, like we have like not everybody is Tony that you can play both sides and then win at the end of the game, like that's true, but I don't think anybody tries to go back and forth and then be like, and then we'll just see what happens, like last season Survivor, Andy plays both sides to try and hopefully set himself up to win. That's exactly what Camille and Robert are doing. It's just that it's in the like, yeah, he wants to be in charge at the end of it. That's not a surprise. Doesn't mean he's not playing both sides.
I mean, what I find interesting, I think we'll end this podcast by looking ahead to what could possibly be coming next episode. And I think in a rebellion, again, pairing really nicely with the Solo storyline, that these two could kind of rebel through their inaction, especially with Sims as the judge. Like, he could say, hey, you gave me no power. You put me in kind of this puppet position. So my hands are off the table. I can't help you right now, Bernard, when things inevitably spill over. So that should be really interesting. One more thing to touch upon from the deep down, this whole Walker is a mole storyline. I don't know. Maybe I'm putting too much faith in Knox. Grace, I 100% believe he's feeding her a fake plan at the end of this episode.
He absolutely is.
It's the Tyrion Lannister in season 2 of Game of Thrones all over again.
Yeah, he. So this thing, I like the scenes of Walker and Knox and Bernard. I didn't love how quickly Knox is like, I know what's happening. I feel like I was just talking about this in a previous another pod I was doing, where I think it is really hard to feel like when you have characters who like figure things out, it is pretty tough that it sometimes can just feel like, could they've actually figured that out? When like I guess they could have. I just didn't think like Knox's revelation worked for me. But then what he does with that did work for me. And him going back and saying like, it's Teddy's mom, and like we're gonna use we're gonna use the gunpowder we had. I am thinking that I would potentially not like Bernard to get fooled by this. I think that I think I need that extra thing. And I probably need the scene next week where Walker and Knox sort of like reveal to each other that like, hey, this hat, and he's like, no, I know, and like,
yeah,
I need all
it's a
that.
good question. Do you think that
Yeah.
Walker's gonna become like so overcome by guilt that she's like, I have to reveal something to you, or do you think he's just gonna flat out tell her, as Bernard's trying to send out stuff for Teddy's mom, like, no, I know you were the mole.
Yeah, I could see it being like, as they're going to do the thing, like they're going to do something, and she's like, "That's not what you said you were doing," and he's like, "Yeah, I know. Like, I know you're you're the mole." But I also want Bernard to not be like I think he's been too clever of a villain to then be caught off guard by like the fake plan. I want it to. At the very least, I want whatever ends up happening, whatever they actually end up doing, to be like not just like them getting a big win over Bernard pretty easily. So mostly I like this. Thought this was pretty good.
Yeah. So Grace, let's look ahead.
Also, can I just say Bernard going full Taron Armstrong watching the live feed? Like, don't interrupt me.
Yeah.
Very funny. Very good.
So do you think he just has like one audio feed on, or or is he listening to all the conversations at once, trying to piece together as he does his own solo show? Like, this is what you missed on day 5062 since Salvador Quinn erased the live feeds.
Taron would have been a great much better shadow for Bernard to be like, so this is what happened yesterday.
Salvador Quinn did get rid of the flashback feature as well.
Right. That's right.
Very controversially.
Yeah.
All right, so let's look ahead, Grace, because we have one more episode, but there is so much set up here. And tell me if you disagree with me. I really think that episode 10 is going to be set up around two main pillars. Ironically enough, two main silos. I think Silo 17, we really, I think, raced through a lot of stuff in this episode to now get the suit on Juliette, to now kind of tie a bow on everything going on in 17. I think we're going to see her make the voyage from 18 back to 17, or 17 back to 18. At the same time, I think the fit's hitting the shan. I think we are going to get something to finally let the barricades burst open wide, to get a skirmish, to finally get this revolution to begin outright, despite the fact that Sims is like, we're in a revolution right now. I think we are going to see a significant step forward that is going to start begetting some violence in episode 10.
It's only why I question whether the safeguard will come up next episode, because I already think they're going to put a ticking clock and everything, which is, can Juliet get back before the rebellion wins out and they try to leave the silo? That is, I think, like, and then other people trying to, there I think next episode could be really good, because I think we didn't see Walker's wife. I always
Carla.
forget her name. We didn't see Carla at all this episode. I feel like she's bound to at least have an appearance, even if it's just like she gets rescued. Which I also feel like could be the fake Walker plan, or the fake Knox plan of like it involves getting Camille out and taking control of that like area. But there's a lot of moving pieces next week where I almost feel like to throw in a safeguard thing of like the whole silo. Like there's already this world where it does feel like if the rebellion won and did what they wanted to do, you would get the result of what the safeguard is intended to do anyway. So I don't think we're getting the safeguard thing. I think we're getting basically like rebellion while Juliette's trying to come back, make sure the information gets to the silo in time that they can't actually leave the silo. I think is what we're getting.
So let me ask a few questions here, Grace, and we can just give quick yes or no's. Because Eater brought this up. Will someone join Juliette in leaving the silo 17?
I like this. She does now have an extra suit. I could see it not being Eater. I could see it being one of the other two unnamed. They're named, but in my head, they're unnamed teens.
Yeah, I don't
the
know.
Baby.
It might,
Just bring the baby.
Like the baby, you can fit like 3 babies in that suit.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be too on the nose to bring Solo, but it could be interesting as well. But I also don't know. Like, I would feel bad that Solo just got all these new friends in his life, and it's like, nope, leave them all behind. You leave your house to them.
If they weren't like teens and having basically like no real like adult supervision, even though like I don't know how old they actually are, I would go for it because I do think that Solo interacting with a bunch of people, like so every interaction of like Solo and Walker, Solo and Bernard, like there's so many fun interactions, but I do think Solo's got to stay and take care of the kiddos.
Will Walker's identity as a mole be outed to someone in Mechanical next episode?
Yes.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I think it will happen. I think to your point, I could really see it in my head of the plan being changed and Knox revealing in that moment that he knows it was her. I don't know if there'll be any sort of consequences in the moment because it might be that like stuff starts spilling over right then and they can't really deal with that. And to that point, Grace, here's a big one. Will any, I'd say major / somewhat minor characters die next episode? And if so, do you have any in mind?
I do think, and I feel like to make it be impactful, at least one person from both sides has to die, I think would be so somebody that's like in the like I feel like, you know, could Walker sacrifice herself because she's the mole, like or like at least like end up in harm's way, like Knox, Shirley, somebody, and it does feel like it has to be someone who's more than just one of the people there, and then like one of like Sims, Bernard, who like Lucas also, I guess, from the rebellion side of things, or Billings, or Hank is close to being important enough.
He's kind of always there in every scene, and it does make me feel like, I don't know about you, like your days might be numbered. I mean, to that point as well, I'll throw out some other names of characters that I think might die. I don't know if like we're hitting a lot of our big characters. And I even speak about, as much as we've kind of been maligning them this entire season, like I think Knox and Shirley might make it out of this season. I could see the tragedy where like Juliet comes back and one of them dies, especially after the whole kiss thing happened a few episodes ago. But I think they've been built up both as important enough characters in their own regard that they would want to see them through to season 3. Looking to some of the other people that are billed as main characters, we have Camille, who I still think I think she's still season 3 material. Carla it might be a thing where like once Walker's treachery is found out, like they kill Carla or something. I could see Carla go.
I kind of don't love if any of like the wives of like this character's wife died. It's like, yeah, come on, you know, give me some stakes.
Notably, Billy Postlethwaite as Hank is main cast. He is regarded as such.
Yeah, I feel that to me is like the weakest of the thing where I'm like, I get it, but he's really, you know, like, come on, you could have killed someone more.
Well, I'll throw in a sort of not a red shirt, but someone who has come to prominence in a recurring role. What about Amundsen, which was the fill-in for Sims as head of security? Like, I could see
this up. That's a guy who's also named Rick. That's the other Rick.
Ah, there he is. There's the other Rick. Well, that's the thing. Only one Rick can survive. So what has been introduced by law, one must die here.
He has one brief scene this episode where he tells Lucas not to go. He's the one who says, he told me not to interrupt him while he's watching the live feeds. That's what he says.
Yeah, so, and this guy is sort of
if Rick and Hank die, I'm going to be like, oh, come on.
No, not these incredibly important characters. But that's the thing, is I feel like this show kind of selfishly wants to keep a lot of these bigger names into season 3. And it's not, while we talk about as voluminous and ever growing as it is, it's not like Game of Thrones level. And even Game of Thrones, I feel like still sometimes exercise restraint, would only kill off like 1 to 2 to maybe 3 characters a season. So for all we know, this could be a relatively bloodless rebellion, but I could definitely see it, especially because Amundsen kind of represents what Billings was talking about earlier in this episode of like, when they picked me to be the sheriff, it's because they thought that I would just be this mindless soldier that would listen to what they said. That's kind of what Amundsen has been in Sims's place. And so he's easily disposable, I think.
I'm a pro wrestling fan, Mike, and there's this thing of like letting the bad guy get a win before the second match. So like them, So I do feel like you kill someone on the rebellion side in a moment where it's like, maybe the rebellion, maybe this was a bad idea, and then they ultimately win out, and somebody in that process, dies or gets killed or whatever. So that's where I'm like one on each side is kind of where I am.
Eye for an eye.
Do you imagine? My favorite TV and movie thing is where somebody looks like they're gonna die, they get stabbed or shot, and then it's like the next scene is like them in the hospital being like, oh, that was close.
Well, that's the Patrick Kennedy, right? We're like,
that's true.
He's been. I mean, that's actually, you know what? He's on top of my list. He is
Kennedy. Yeah, he
far and away my least favorite character on this show. I absolutely hate this guy. And again, I don't think it's like we're supposed to hate him. Like, he's so freaking useless. Even in this, he's just saying the same 3 things to every character. And we're supposed to sit there being like, yep, okay, this is meaningful time in my life that I'm taking up watching him tell Kathleen Billings the exact same thing he told Paul Billings, which is the exact same thing he found out for Juliette.
Yeah, he just tells her the visor image is a lie. Tells Kathleen that this episode. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all he does. That's all he ever does. It says the same 3 things like a doll they can pull the string on. And he says the same 3 things over and over again. He could go. He could die. He should have died in season 1.
All right, I'll say that one person from each side dies, and then also for Mike, I will predict Patrick Kennedy dies.
You know what the safeguard is? That they put a bomb in one person in the silo. They implanted it like the birth control, and that one person's Patrick Kennedy.
What if he's the safeguard?
I may have to quit the show if he's the safeguard.
That's okay. The last episode is next week. That's fine.
There we go. Exactly. Well, next week, we'll be getting together, Grace, to see if our predictions will end up bearing out, or if yet again, as the show indicated in this episode, they will surprise us. This was such a fun time. Look, again, we have our nitpicks for season 2, but when Silo's good, it's really freaking good. And I feel like this episode was a full-on display of that. And it really makes me excited for what's to come next week.
I couldn't agree more. I think it'll be a very eventful finale. And should be fun to talk about it with you, and appreciate everybody who's listening along. And we'll see everyone next week.
Absolutely. And we can certainly, I think, also look ahead to the fact that, especially because we know there's a season 3 and especially a season 4, a final point, how this is going to set up what might possibly be happening. The cliffhanger, to your point, they might leave us on. There's surely going to be not just the character, plenty of stuff to get into, as well as here on WeKnowScriptedTV.com. Lots of stuff going around in terms of the realm of scripted TV, including ramping up some coverage of stuff that's coming in January and February. So do not miss a second of it. And of course, let us know your thoughts, your theories as to what you think is going to be happening in the finale in the comments below or on social media. That's going to do it for this week of We Know Silo. We'll be back next week for the last episode of Silo Season 2. Until then, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.